Hello everyone, I'm Gelinas and today I'm going to continue with my sewing project of making a new outfit for my BJD. So in the first video I showed my process for picking out fabrics and trims, the different details that I'm going to focus on for my outfit. So I did a rough sketch of what I had in mind last time, and after picking my fabrics I went ahead and solidified my ideas and did it as a singular outfit that you could see. So this is the design I've put together with what the fabrics I have and the inspiration. So today I'm going to show you how to do a pattern and sew a BJD shirt. So for my design, it's just a simple long sleeve shirt. It goes about to her knuckles because I want her to have that extra protection when she's out in the forest, and she has bands around to help with that. So I'm going to show you how to make this, and it has slits on the side. I'm also going to make her crop top that's above her shirt. So you guys will get to see that process. Okay, for this method, I'm going to do something informal with my pattern. So with the sketch that we have, so I have this undershirt and I'm going to make it out of this material. So it's long sleeves, and then I sort of have it going halfway across her hands, so like at her knuckles it'll stop. Because I want her sort of like a protection of her hands. And then it's a wide scoop collar. It stops about mid-thigh, and then it has a slit on the side. So I'm going to be working with that for my shirt pattern. So you're going to take your model and measure. So I want to find out the length that I'm going to use for the shirt. So about from her shoulder and then I'm going to measure down to mid-thigh. Alright, and so that's going to be about, it's going to be about 7.5 inches, but you want to have some seam allowance so that you can finish the edges. So I'm going to go to about 8.5 inches so I can have seam allowance on the top and the bottom. So you are going to, on your fabric, you can measure that down, and then you'll also do it across. So I'm using regular chalk just because this is a darker one, but also you can use tailor's chalk on lighter colors because that will actually show up. So it's about 8.5 inches. And so this is scrap fabric, so I also have to cut off the extra and just make a square. All right, so across, you want to measure across the bust. So what is the bust size of your doll? They also include that on the website. So this is about 9 inches for her. If the top is going to go down, you're also going to measure your waist and then your hips. The hips are usually the widest, so I go with that measurement. So for her hips, it's about 10 inches. So I'm going to go with 10 inches when I make my pattern. So since they're dolls, you don't have to worry too much about it being too tight, because they won't feel it and they don't have a comfort level. But I'm going So about 10 inches, and you want to have about an inch of seam allowance. So that would be like 11. So I'm going to do 5.5 inches for one side. So I'm doing a front piece and a back piece. So about 5.5 inches. So I have this is gonna be my front panel, and you can cut that out. Alright, so I have a front panel, and so I want to have a collar and an arm scythe. So that's going to be like the armhole where the sleeve is going to go in. And since I want this to be symmetrical, I'm going to fold this in half. So when I cut it out, I can cut it on the fold. So this is how I'm going to make it symmetrical. So if I look at my doll again, so I want her sleeve is going to come from a certain length from her shoulder. So I'm going to measure that, starting at the top of her shoulder, and I'm measuring down till about just a little under her armpit, so she has enough space to get her arm through. So that's going to be about 2.5 inches. And then you also measure across. So this is going to tell you about how wide the back of it's going to be, and this is about 3 inches. So on my pattern, I'm going to go down about 2.5 inches. That's where the end of my sleeve is going to be. And I want to add a little bit of seam allowance in there, so I'm going to go a little bit under that line. And I'm going to curve it out. Since armholes, it's got to be sort of circular. So I'm going to make this a bit rounded out. And then for the back, so I got to make sure that it's going to be that 3 inches. So when I measured this, the armhole is going to have to end here. So I have to make sure that I have that 3 inches in there. And so this is about 2.5 inches, which is plenty of space, so I can move my armhole a little bit more in when I cut. All right, and then I'm going to measure out how wide I want her neckline. So I want the sleeve to be about from there to there, from the edge of her shoulder to about to the middle of her shoulder, so that I have a wide enough neck hole for her. And so if I start where I want it to end and do that on both sides, it's going to be about 1.5 inches for her neck hole. So I'm going to take that, and since this is folded, you're going to go through half of that and still needs seam allowance, so I'm gonna just give it a whole, like about an inch, so that it's gonna be 2 inches wide. And I'm just going to circle it out, because this is a neck hole, so it's gonna be rounded around the neck. Alright, so I'm gonna cut out this circle where I marked. And so when you take it apart, it should look like this. So this is my back panel. And so the chalk, it can easily brush away, or you can wet it and then still get rid of the marks. So I can sort of compare that to her. So I lay her out. So this is my back panel. And so I have my arm scythe. So this extra that kind of overlaps, that's your seam allowance. So you're gonna sew on that so you have space to move. And then it's about as wide on the neck hole. All right, so I'm going to cut out another piece for the front. And since she has a small bust, I don't really have to worry about adding darts or anything. So I'm gonna do another one of these. So I'm going to lay this piece on top, and I'm going to trace it. So this is why I made it a bit wider, so that I have some extra amount for the bust. That extra little bit's gonna go and help cover her more. And then I'm gonna trace this. And then, so here I have the piece a little bit longer, and you want to keep that because you want the shirt to drop a bit lower in the front than you do in the back, since people don't like things up against the collar of their neck. I'm gonna have my neckline be a little bit lower in the front. I'm gonna cut this out again. So see, if I start it on her shoulders, it drops a little lower on her neck because it's meeting this at a different point. So I can, and so you can see sort of how loose this is on her, and I want it pretty loose since she's going to be out in the woods and she doesn't want to be restricted. But I have my seam allowance in here too, so that's going to be taking up some of the space. Okay, so looking at where the shirt stops, I'm gonna mark where I want the slit to end, because I want the slit to be right where her hips are starting, so about here. So I can mark that with chalk, or I'm gonna put a pin there. That's where I want the slit to start. I'm gonna measure that. About 2 3/4. I'm gonna do that on all of my sides. So So you want to make sure when you're sewing you line that up. So you're going to sew from there to there, and you'll have this gap here. And then you'll sew these pieces on the shoulder. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cut out the sleeves. So a good helpful way to do this is to measure out how wide your armhole is. So I'm going to put these pieces together and I'm going to measure this out. So this is about 7 inches. And since I want to add a little bit seam allowance, I'm going to do about 7, like probably about 8 inches. And that's just for the top, just for this armhole. And then you make it a little more slender down. So measuring her arm, starting from the top of her shoulder, going across. And I wanted it to end at her knuckles since I'm doing an extra long sleeve shirt. So I'm gonna probably stop around 8.5 so I can have a seam allowance to roll the edges. So 8.5 by 8. All right, so the thing about sleeves are you have a rounded corner to it. So when you have your pattern piece, this is a rounded corner. And so you need to make a piece that would match that. So since this is a curved inward, we need to make curved outward for like a puzzle. So I'm going to flip this over. So I did the 8 inches, but really you don't need all that. That's extra. Because when you have a curve, it's going to add inches in there. So I'm gonna make a curved outward edge. And sort of to do a matching piece so that you can fit this in there. So this is more than enough because this goes beyond where my armhole is. So I have my seam allowance in there. So if you were to measure this, now that it has a curve, it's 4.5, which when unfold it, that'll be 9 inches. So really, I'm only going to stop sewing at the 4-inch mark. So around here. So that's about all of my usable sleeve. And then you want to angle this because the sleeve is going to be closer to her wrist. So you're going to measure her arm, so her hand, see how wide the opening to the sleeve needs to be. It's about 3.5. I just need a little wider than that. So I'm gonna go to 4 inches, which means 2 on each side. So when I open this, so this is gonna be about where it is. And I'm going to follow that line. And straighten it up. So my sleeve has this curved look to it where it follows the arm. So I'm gonna cut that out. So you don't want to make this curve too low, because if you made it any lower, that's like suit jackets where you want it to be close to your body. but you want her to be able to lift her arms up wide, so that's why you have a low curve here. So if I open it up, it should look like this. So this is going to be my sleeve. I'm going to cut out another one of these. Another thing to remember when you're cutting out pattern pieces, you always want to do it in the same direction on your fabric. So my fabric sort of has this grain line to it, and you always want to follow that. So I'm cutting my pieces long ways down the grain. So I have a little piece here extra after I've cut into it, so I wouldn't just fit my sleeve into that piece because it's going in a different direction. And so you want your fabric to look cohesive and not have the lines going in different directions when you sew it together. And for certain fabrics, it does affect the amount of stretch that is happening to them. So some fabrics are more stretchy across and up and down. So if you switch that up, then it's going to look wonky when you sew it together. It's going to stretch when you're under the machine. So we want to make sure we have all the pieces lining up the right way. So we cut it in the same direction. So I'm going to trace my pieces again. So I have all the pieces out for just the shirt. So I have my sleeves and then my front and back. And so when you sew it all together, you put the pieces up together, it should look like that. And then you'll just connect them on the sides. Okay, so I'm going to sew these pieces together, and I'm doing this on a serger, which it finishes the edges while it sews. But if you don't have a serger, you can do the same stitches on your regular machine. You'll just connect the same pieces. You can use a zigzag stitch to help finish it. And then I will also show a narrow rolled edge for the finishing at the bottom. So for my shirt, I have the front and back pieces. And so I'm going to sew together just one of these shoulders. So I'm only sewing one. Alright, so this would be serged edges. So it's already finished and clean. So I just did one side, and I'm going to serge around this collar here before I close it, because it's harder to fit it under the machine since it's so small. So I'm going to serge from this shoulder spot all the way to the other shoulder spot. And you can do this on your regular sewing machine. You'll just fold it down, and I'll show you that in the next step. So I serged the collar, and then I'm going to sew the other shoulder pieces together. So then I have the collars finished on the inside. Okay. So now that's the hole for my neck. And then I can add the sleeves on the sides. So once again, make sure that the chalk is on the inside of the outfit. So all this, the sewn edges, they're going to be on the inside. So I'm going to line this up with my curves. And then you're going to follow it all the way around. And so I have some of the seam allowance in here. So when you line it up, you should have some left over. So I'm just going to move this, shift it a bit so that it's evenly distributed on each side. So I'm going to have some seam allowance so I can sew the sleeve closed. So you can do this with your regular machine. You'll just follow the curve. So when you turn it over, it should look like that. Now on the inside, I followed the curve on here. And I'll do that for the other sleeve as well. So all together you should have, it should look like a cross sort of. So you'll have 2 long pieces on every side. All right. So you have the edge of your sleeve, and I could easily serge that and fold it over so that I can have a clean finish. Okay. So when you put this, we're going to put this under the regular sewing machine and turn over these edges. So I have the regular machine, and I'm just going to turn this, I'm going to fold this edge just once because it's already been serged, so I don't need to do anything else beside that. I'm going to fold it toward the inside of the garment. So where all this other sewing is seen, you're going to turn it that way. And you're just going to fold it over once and sew that down. So when you turn it over, it should look like this. It's a nice clean finish. So if you don't have a serger, do this step first. Just fold over your rough fabric and then fold it over again. And so you'll sew it twice. So you'll sew the same line twice, and then you won't have to worry about it, the frayed edges. So now I'm going to also do the neck hole. So just like I did the sleeve, I'm going to turn it over. So you have to put your hole in the middle of the machine and turn your fabric. So this is what it looks like on the inside. It's folded over, and then when you turn it back over, this is what you'll see when they wear it on the outside. So now I'm going to connect the sleeves, and I will stop at the part I marked off. So in the inside of my fabric, I have my little mark here from the chalk, and I'm going to sew from the end of the sleeve all the way down the side, and I'm going to stop where my chalk is. So I'm just going to sew this side of the shirt and do that for both sides. If you have a serger and you sort of have this little overlap, you can cut this off because you don't need it anymore. It was just your seam allowance to make sure you had enough space to go around. So I'm going to cut into the fabric and get rid of that excess underneath. For people, you normally wouldn't do that because you need your selvage your extra fabric in case you need to alter it later for change of weight. Since dolls don't change, then you're fine. So I'm stopping where my chalk mark is. So I have this little slit here in the opening of the shirt, and I'll go and do this other side. So now both sides have the slit on the side, and I'm going to serge around this whole opening. If you have a regular machine, just fold it over once and then go over it again. So I'm just going to go around the whole edge to make it clean. You always want to run off a little extra so it doesn't get tangled back up in the machine. So now it's all clean. And then I'm going to fold this over and sew it down so that I have that clean edge look all the way around. And with these extra strands, you tie them off and cut them so that your hem doesn't come undone. Okay, and you'll start on the slit part. Fold it over. So when you have right angles here, you fold this one side over and then you fold the other side on top of it, so that you have this uniform look on the outside. Lift your pressure foot and then you'll shift it. Fold and then fold the other side on top of it. Back stitch to reinforce. Alright, and so now you can see you'll look on the inside or outside in this case, and so it's all clean on there. So your edges are nice. Alright, so this is the shirt completed so far. So we have the long sleeves. We have a wide scoop neckline, and we have the slit on the side. So my next feature to add will be the embellishments. So I want to do some hand embroidery on the edges, and the bands that I'll add on her sleeves will help bunch it up together for her final design effect. I'm going to show in the next video of me making the crop top that goes on top of this, and then we'll put the look together. Thank you for watching, and I hope this was helpful in your dolly sewing endeavors. See you next time. Bye.